Some of the most deeply ingrained pain comes from early experiences, moments when our emotional needs weren't met, when love came with conditions, or when our attempts to express ourselves were met with silence or punishment. As children, we don't have the language to say, "I'm hurt," so instead we say, "It must be me, I must be the problem." That's how the belief of being broken starts, not through facts, but through interpretation, misunderstood and internalized over time. And those interpretations become stories we carry for years, maybe decades. We replay past rejections in new relationships. We sabotage opportunities because, deep down, we don't feel we deserve them. And each time we stumble, we mistake the fallout as more proof that something is wrong with us. But it's not proof, it's pattern. And the beauty of patterns is that they can be traced, understood, and eventually rewritten. Recognizing that you are hurt, not broken, allows you to ask a different set of questions. Not, "What's wrong with me?" but, "What happened to me?" And that subtle shift opens the door to self-compassion, which is where true healing begins. When you believe you're broken, you tend to disconnect from yourself, from others, from hope. It's a belief that keeps you stuck, replaying the same pain in different costumes. But when you start to see your reactions as adaptations, as responses that made sense at the time, a little grace sneaks in. You begin to soften. You stop viewing your anxiety as a flaw and start seeing it as a signal. You stop calling your depression laziness and start recognizing it as exhaustion from years of emotional labor. You stop blaming yourself for numbing out and realize that sometimes numbness is the mind's way of surviving a world that once felt too much. Healing doesn't mean the pain never happened. It means you've stopped letting it define who you are. It means creating enough safety in your mind and body to say, "I'm allowed to be more than my past." That shift from shame to understanding isn't easy, but it's powerful. It's the difference between constantly trying to fix yourself and finally giving yourself permission to just be. And being is enough. One of the reasons this belief that you're broken sticks so hard is because pain isolates. When you're hurting, it's easy to assume that everyone else is doing fine, that they've somehow figured life out while you're still drowning. But you're only ever seeing the highlight reels. You don't see the panic attacks behind someone's curated Instagram feed. You don't see the late-night self-doubt or the unresolved grief sitting quietly behind someone's smile. We compare our rawest emotions to other people's filtered lives and convince ourselves that we're the exception, the damaged one. But the truth is, almost everyone is carrying something. The difference is, some have learned to hide it better than others, and some have had the privilege of healing spaces, therapy, supportive relationships, safe environments, while others have only had silence and survival. You are not behind. You are not broken. You are someone who's been forced to carry your pain alone for too long. That doesn't make you weak. It makes you human. And your humanity is not a flaw to fix. It's a reminder that you still feel, still care, still hope. And that means your story isn't over. There's an idea in psychology called earned, secure attachment. It means that even if you didn't grow up feeling safe, loved, or emotionally supported, it's still possible to become someone who does feel secure, someone who can trust, connect, and love deeply. That kind of healing doesn't come from pretending the past didn't happen. It comes from honoring your pain and choosing to care for it differently now. It comes from building a new internal narrative, one where your worth isn't tied to your trauma and your identity isn't built on wounds. Think of it like this. If someone has a broken leg, They don't question their ability to walk ever again. They understand the leg needs rest, care, and physical therapy. Emotional wounds are no different. But instead of giving ourselves that rest and support, we pile on pressure. We expect immediate recovery. We shame ourselves for not bouncing back. Real healing takes reparenting the parts of you that were neglected, talking to yourself in the voice you always needed, not the one you grew up hearing. And when you begin to do that, bit by bit, you realize you were never broken. You just needed a chance to feel safe enough to heal. Sometimes healing isn't dramatic. It's not a big breakthrough in therapy or a life-changing realization. Sometimes it's just choosing to speak kindly to yourself when the inner critic gets loud. It's letting yourself rest without guilt. It's canceling plans because your nervous system is begging for quiet. It's saying no to people who only see you as useful, not valuable. These small moments are acts of repair. They tell your mind and body, we're safe now. We don't have to hustle for love anymore. It's incredibly hard to shift out of survival mode when that's been your default for years. But slowly, your body begins to trust that it's okay to feel. And when that trust is built, when your nervous system isn't constantly bracing for attack, you begin to notice life differently. You enjoy a sunrise. You laugh without bracing for something to ruin it. You reach out without fearing rejection every time. These aren't signs of a fixed person. They're signs of a person who's remembering how to live. You weren't broken. Before, you were adapting to pain. And now, you're slowly learning to move through life without that weight. The narrative of brokenness often gets reinforced by culture. We're surrounded by messages telling us to improve, fix, optimize, or level up. And while growth is beautiful, it can become toxic when it's rooted in shame. You don't need to be better to be lovable. You don't have to achieve emotional perfection to deserve rest or respect. That belief, that only the healed version of you is worthy, is a lie that keeps you chasing some future version of yourself while ignoring the one who's here now, hurting and worthy all at once. Healing asks you to stop abandoning yourself. It invites you to sit with the messiness, to stop outsourcing your value, and to finally see that the person who has survived every storm so far deserves more than your criticism. They deserve your care. You are not a project. You are a person. And even when you feel overwhelmed, lost, or disconnected, the fact that you're still here, still trying, matters more than you know. Hurt doesn't make you broken. It makes you real. And real people aren't flawless. They're whole because of what they've been through, not in spite of it. We often think of wounds as physical things, visible, tangible, something you can point to and say, there, that's where. It hurts, but emotional wounds don't leave bruises you can see. They live beneath the surface, shaping how we think, feel, and respond to the world around us. Emotional wounding happens when something critical to our sense of self, our safety, our worth, our ability to belong, is damaged. And often, it doesn't take one big dramatic event to cause it. Sometimes it's a series of small but repeated experiences. Being ignored when you cried, being told you were too much, being punished for being vulnerable. Each moment tells your nervous system the same thing. It's not safe to be who you are. And so you adjust, you shrink, you hide, you become who you think the world wants, not who you truly are. That's how emotional wounds form. Not as a single scar, but as a reprogramming of how you show up in life. The brain is wired to protect us from pain, but emotional pain activates the same systems as physical pain. When we feel rejected, embarrassed, or shamed, our brain processes that experience much like it would a physical injury. That's why social exclusion, heartbreak, or childhood neglect can hurt so intensely. They're not just in your head. They light up the same neural pathways as a broken bone. And because emotional wounds often happen in relationships, with parents, partners, friends, it makes future relationships feel risky. You start to expect pain. You flinch at love. You anticipate abandonment. And this hypervigilance isn't irrational. It's your mind trying to protect a wound it never got to heal. The psychology of emotional wounding is complex, but at its core is one simple truth. When we are hurt, we adapt. Not because we're weak or broken, but because our survival once depended on it. And until that hurt is acknowledged and tended, too, we'll keep reliving it in different forms, through anxiety, avoidance, perfectionism, or emotional numbness. Emotional wounds often hide beneath behaviors that look like personality traits. Maybe you've always been the overachiever, constantly striving, never resting. Maybe you're the peacemaker, the one who avoids conflict at all costs. Or maybe you've been called cold or distant, when in reality, you're just terrified of being vulnerable. These aren't flaws, they're strategies, they're emotional armor. At one point, being hyper-independent or emotionally numb protected you. But over time, these defenses become cages. The problem is, we start to confuse our coping mechanisms with our identity. We say things like, "That's just who I am," when really, it's who we became to survive. Emotional wounds trick us into believing that love is conditional, that safety must be earned, and that being ourselves is too risky. But none of that is true. It's just a story your pain started telling a long time ago. And like any story, it can be rewritten, but only when you're willing to trace it back to where it began. One of the most damaging effects of emotional wounding is what it does to our sense of self-worth. A child who is neglected doesn't think, "My parents are emotionally unavailable." They think, "I must not be lovable." A teen who is bullied doesn't think, "These kids are projecting their own pain." They think, "There's something wrong with me." The mind naturally internalizes pain, especially when we're young and our identities are still forming. And unless we unlearn those early conclusions, we carry them into adulthood. Suddenly, every rejection feels personal. Every mistake feels like proof that we're not good enough. And because those wounds are invisible, we rarely realize that we're reacting to old pain in a new situation. That's what makes emotional wounds so tricky. They don't scream, they whisper. They show up as self-doubt, hesitation, overthinking, and the quiet urge to disappear when life gets overwhelming. And unless we pause to ask ourselves, where is this really coming from? We end up treating symptoms instead of healing the root.